Welcome back. This is the first Sunday of Lent. I love that last sentence of the wilderness story in Luke. He departed from him until an opportune time. That sounds more like the ending for a season of some 6-episode show you've been streaming, like, oh no, we can't end it there. It's a great story from Luke that I wonder about. Of course, I like Mark's version better. It leaves more to the imagination. Mark tells the whole story in 3 sentences. The Spirit immediately drove him out into the wilderness, and he was in the wilderness 40 days, being tempted by Satan. And he was with the wild animals, and the angels were ministering to him. And that's it. That's Mark. Well, the really weird part about Luke's version is that we never really hear Jesus' voice. Every one of the sentences Jesus utters is a verse from Deuteronomy or a psalm. If you look at it, you can't find Jesus, not in his own words anyway. Don't you think that's weird? Academic scholarship likes to make a big deal out of the ambiguous use of the word for tempted or temptation. It can also mean test. Just as one of the translations of the Lord's Prayer uses test instead of temptation. So the traditional take on this difference is that God tests while Satan tempts. God may have tested Abraham, but it was about helping him to discover the depth and strength of his own character. God tests Adam while the serpent tempts Eve. They like to make a big deal, those theologians and biblical scholars, out of this nuance. And maybe the original storytellers were weaving these subtleties into their stories, but maybe it's just theological scholars have too much time on their hands. The story boils down to this, in my mind: fear of hunger, fear of powerlessness, fear of death. Now, what can mitigate those fears? Clearly, there is little we can do to solve or fix any of them. I mean, when we hunger, we can attempt to satiate whatever is gnawing at us, but chances are the hungers that plague us most are ones we can never satiate, ever. Powerlessness and death are also unbeatable in the long run. So what can mitigate these fears? Truly mitigate them? I think the clue is in Deuteronomy, and you may not remember off the top of your head, but Deuteronomy holds one of my favorite themes in the Bible. What we heard today from Deuteronomy is a very tail end of the story, but of course, the real story hasn't actually ended yet. I had a wonderful opportunity to sit at the feet of the great teacher and scholar Walter Brueggemann. It was decades ago now, at the College of Preachers, where I attended several week-long seminars in which he was the featured speaker or preacher or teacher. He could take what seemed like an obscure passage from the Hebrew text and turn it into a grand mythic tale that wrapped then and now into the same wisdom story. I had never paid much attention to the book of Deuteronomy until I heard him talk about it. And then I was amazed. Because basically Deuteronomy is one really long speech by Moses to those who had made it through the wilderness and were about to enter the promised land. Moses didn't get to go with them into the promised land. And so, like any parent whose kid is about to go on the first date, Moses sits down the whole assembly by the Jordan River. The Jordan, remember, is the boundary between the wilderness and the promised land. And then Moses preaches to them for 34 chapters. While he gets into the into a lot of detail, the theme that I'm thinking of is woven throughout those chapters. And you will recognize this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. And then immediately Moses says this. These commandments, these 34 that he's about to do, 34 chapters rather, these commandments that I give you today are to be on your heart. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols to your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. Now, why? Why are they supposed to tie ribbons on their fingers and post-it notes on the refrigerator? It's to remember. To remember, 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 remember. And what is it they're supposed to remember? Well, just this. That all that they have, and all that they will receive, and all that will eventually come to them is a gift. A gift. A gift from the Creator of all that is. So, be grateful. Gratitude is what Moses insists they remember. To remember gratitude. Now, I know I talk about gratitude a lot, but that's because it's powerful. Really, it is. It's an actual superpower that we can have. But also because that's the underlying principle spelled out by Moses really from the beginning. And it's the principle really at the center of what has evolved to what we do today. We are to remember who we are and whose we are and hold our gratitude for it. To remember who we are and whose we are and hold our gratitude. Moses kept saying to those folks, do not forget. Do not forget. Because if you do forget, if you forget who you are and whose you are, and that all that you are is a gift, well then you're going to lose it. All of it. Do not forget. And the way to remember is to be grateful. To cultivate gratitude as the primary crop in the field of your heart. What gratitude also does, of course, is to nurture humility. That's part of its power. If we remember who we are and whose we are, we also remember it isn't about us. Anything that can wrestle down our hubris and pride is some doggone powerful stuff. Gratitude also takes us all the way through Luke's story about Jesus in the wilderness. You see, Jesus is tempted or tested, depending on your perspective, by the fears we are all tested by: hunger, powerlessness, and death. We fear not getting what we want, whether or not it is even what we need: hunger. We fear being told no and living within the confines of other people's will, or worse yet, the capriciousness of nature: powerlessness. We fear death. We fear death until we don't. If you've ever witnessed someone in the process of dying let loose of that fear, then you have witnessed true liberation, freedom. As I said, and as you know, the power of fear of these things shrinks. I mean, it really does shrink in the presence of gratitude. We will still know apprehension about what we do not and cannot control or anticipate. But held within the well of our gratitude, the power of fear fails. Held within gratitude, the power of fear thins and the heart grows stronger. I'm guessing that in the wilderness, Jesus did remember what Moses told him and us not to forget: who we are and whose we are. The power of fear falters and it withers in the presence of that kind of gratitude. Thanks for being here. Peace be with you.